Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, we're going to make a start. Hi, guys. Welcome to our first International Dinner of Human. Today is South Asian Night, and we're so glad that you're here to join us. Whether you've come to Christian Union before or it's your first time coming to a Christian Union event, we're so glad that you're here.
So hi, everyone. My name is Emma, or Emma if you're not from New Zealand. I'm a third-year economist at Corpus, and what about you?
Yeah, I'm Rian. I'm a second-year economist at Queen's. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're very econ heavy, but don't worry, we won't give you our LinkedIn or ask about internships.
Yeah. So this week, we're having an event centered around the theme of human. We'll have various talks, interviews, performances, and food. And so we're all going to be discovering about the theme of what it means to be human and who we actually are.
Yeah, so before we start, there are a few practicalities. So first off, exits. So there's the one right behind you where you came in. I think a little bit later in the evening, we might close those doors to keep in the warmth. And then there's an exit just on the left-hand side. You can ask someone in a human jumper. There are also exits here and here in case of a fire. In terms of toilets, they are just at the back and then to the right. There's like a door right there. Again, if you're confused, ask someone wearing a human jumper.
Yeah, so today we're looking at the theme, this day we're looking at the theme of rational. And if you came to our lunchtime talk, we're so glad that you're here as well. And today we're going to be continuing with that theme, looking at whether Christianity is a Western religion.
Yeah, and to warm us up, we've got a quick game for you all. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the game is human or AI generated. We've got a bunch of pictures of people or maybe people who do not exist. Your job is to see which is which. We'll give you like 10 seconds, we'll count down, then we'll reveal the answer. Yeah, let's go.
Number one.
Starting off easy.
Oh.
Oh.
Has everyone got their answers?
Yeah.
We'll reveal the answer now.
Oh.
It's a human. Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, so we started off easy. What about this guy? Is he a human or is he AI generated? Okay, we'll reveal 3, 2, 1. AI generated. Yeah.
Oh. Number 3. AI or human? And the answer is AI generated.
Ooh. All right, next one. What about this kid? Wait.
It's a hard one.
Oh my goodness, someone gave it away. Okay, next slide. Who is it? It is Boris Johnson as a kid.
Well done. Next one.
Yeah.
What do we think?
All right, let's reveal it. AI, yeah. Okay, last one.
Ooh.
This guy. Ooh, okay. Deep thinking here.
Yep.
Who is he? Human! This is actually Lord Sainsbury of Turville. He's actually the head of the University of Cambridge. Who knew? Not related to Sainsbury's, but yeah.
Did anyone get 6 out of 6? Anyone?
Anyone 6 out of 6?
Anyone?
No?
No. Oh,
Okay.
one person. Well done.
Okay, great. All right, next slide, please. So now we're going to have a performance by Juanita. Juanita's from Pakistan, and she's going to be singing us 2 songs, 2 hymns. One is in Urdu and one is in Punjabi. So she's just going to quickly introduce herself. But yeah, big round of applause as she comes up. Woo!
Hi everyone, I'm Juanita. I'm a third year medical student at Magdalen. A bit about myself, so I was born and raised in London, but my background is Pakistani. So both my parents were born and raised in Christian households in Pakistan, which is a majority Muslim country. And today I just wanted to share a bit about how Pakistani culture is incorporated in Christianity. I've also brought an Urdu Bible, which I've left with Emma to put on the book stand. So if you're interested, do have a look. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I do have to leave early, but I'll be around at other events this week. The first song I'll be singing is a song in Urdu called Piche Masih Ke, and it means I'm following Jesus. And the lyrics will be up on the screen for you guys to follow. And in Pakistani culture, we love making loads of noise. So if you want to clap along with me, please feel free to do so. पीछे मसीह के चलते रहे आगे ही आगे. Okay, I'm gonna start again because I can't hear the backing track. Thank you. Okay. पीछे मसीह के चलते रहे आगे ही आगे बढ़ते रहे यीशु के होते डर क्यों रहे बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले ये गाते हुए सारा ज़माना गाए यही जय राजा यीशु जय प्रभु जियो सारा ज़माना गाए यही जय राजा यीशु जय प्रभु जी यही हमारा नारा रहे बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले ये गाते हुए दुश्मन ज़माना होता रहे रंजो अलम की परवाह किसे दुश्मन ज़माना होता रहे रंजो अलम की परवाह किसे वो ही हमारा हम उसके बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले ये गाते हुए पीछे मसीह के चलते रहे आगे ही आगे बढ़ते रहे यीशु के होते डर क्यों रहे बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले बढ़ते चले ये गाते हुए. Thank you. And the second song I'll be singing is a Punjabi Zaboor. Zaboor means psalm, so this song is based on Psalm 136. शुक्र यहोवा दा ही करो करो शुक्र यहोवा दा शुक्र यहोवा दा ही करो करो शुक्र यहोवा दा शुक्र करो तुसी ओदा जेड़ा ऐ खुदा वादा खुदा शुक्र करो तुसी ओदा जेड़ा ऐ खुदा वादा खुदा क्यों जो भला हैगा रहमत ओदी है सदा क्यों जो भला हैगा रहमत ओदी है सदा वडे वडे कम जो करदा शुक्र करो तुसी उसे दा वडे वडे कम जो करदा शुक्र करो तुसी उसदा जिसने आसमान बनाए रहमत ओदी है सदा जिसने आसमान बनाए रहमत ओदी है सदा शुक्र यहोवा दा ही करो करो शुक्र यहोवा दा करो शुक्र यहोवा दा करो शुक्र यहोवा दा Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juanita. That was so beautiful.
Right, so we'll move on to introducing Peter, who's our speaker today. So if I can ask him to join him up here with me. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm okay, getting hungry.
So Peter, thank you for being with us today. So most of us don't know who you are, so why don't you tell us who you are, what you're doing here, and what's a white guy like you talking to us about whether Christianity is a Western religion or not?
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm here this week with my wife, Lynette. And we've worked with international students for the last 21, 22 years in Christian ministry, but we have quite a journey of nearly 30 years of marriage and a cross-cultural marriage, and working in China and Singapore and, a place called Oxford as well. But we're here to do talks with, actually it's my job to give talks about Christianity from a cross-cultural perspective. But you asked me, what's a white guy like me doing talking about this? Well, I have written a certain book with a certain title called Is Christianity a Western Religion? And they're available at the back there. I wrote this because we were answering lots of questions from people from all over the world, and Lynette and I were trained in looking at the Christian faith from a non-Western perspective. Actually, this is just one of 20 questions in the book, which I hope to answer. So,
Brilliant. So, Peter, you came to Cambridge last night? Last night, okay. But you've also been in the place that should not be named, but you did name for 16 years.
I'm afraid I did, yes.
Yeah. Okay, in your honest opinion, which is better?
Which is better? Well, we loved the other place so much we left it. We have since moved to Bath. So our friends are saying, was Oxford not posh enough that you had to move to Bath? I know we enjoyed working in the other place, but we did have to say, we were walking on the streets, weren't we, yesterday, going, well, I have to say Cambridge is actually nicer. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, we were
Good
saying,
answer, good answer.
So obviously today is South Asian themed food. Yeah. We're all looking forward for dinner, obviously. But I wanted to ask you, if you had the power to fuse a Western food and a South Asian food, which would you choose?
Well, I think in our home we actually have a fusion all the time. So I grew up with very English, very ordinary English food, and wondered why I wasn't enjoying it. And then I first met Lynette, and she said, can I cook you some food? This is in our first year of university, and what guy wouldn't like someone to suddenly say, please cook me, shall I cook you dinner? And it was this amazing dish. It was just incredible. It was like spicy and exotic. Actually, it was just instant noodles. But I'd never had it before. But I found out that my grandfather, who was a soldier in South Asia many, many years ago, came back from South Asia and couldn't quite cope with English food anymore. So he used to sprinkle curry powder on his mashed potatoes and stew and that kind of thing. We tend to I put chili in my shepherd's pie now, and we always have a roast chicken with garlic and rice.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll let you crack on, Peter. So, yeah.
Yeah, food is always an adventure, isn't it? The first time I went to Singapore was because Lynette's parents had heard about this boy called Peter who was dating their daughter. And so they invited me to come for the whole summer. Now, when you go to visit your girlfriend's parents for dinner, that's one thing. This was 11 weeks on the other side of the world. It was kind of thing that could go really, really well or really badly, but it was lovely, except for the fact that the very, very first meal that we had was sea slug stew, sea cucumber stew, which is a real expensive delicacy. But I said to my mother-in-law many years later, why did you give me that on my first day? She said, I was testing you. I didn't want my daughter to be condemned to a life of fish and chips. So I'd like us to look. So what I'm going to do is at some point during my talk, I'm going to read a little bit of the Bible, and it's on the cards on your table. I'm not going to go into it into huge detail with this, but take this away, and better still, look it up in the Bible itself so you get the whole context. But it's a part of a speech given by one of the early Christian teachers in the city of Athens. And I'll explain a little bit more about that when we come to it. So when Lynette and I were first married and we were working in a rural part of China, we were actually in a university which unusually was in the countryside. And while we were there, we were expecting our first child. Now, I'm sure you know that many women, when they're pregnant, have strange desires when it comes to food. And Lynette suddenly found that she couldn't eat Chinese food. Now, Lynette is Chinese. She'd always tend to prefer Asian food certainly to English food. And suddenly she found that she couldn't eat the local food, which was difficult because we're in rural China. There was nothing else available. And then a friend of ours, a colleague from the US, said that he was going to the nearby city. Was there anything that he could get for us? So he said, oh, yes, please, could you go to McDonald's and buy us as many double hamburgers as you can carry? And he did. He came back later that day with 10 double hamburgers, which we then ate for the next 5 days. Not necessarily sure that it's ideal food for a pregnant woman, but we enjoyed it. You see, even all those years ago, McDonald's was a worldwide brand. And in every country you can imagine, but even though they adapt, certainly more these days, to local tastes, McDonald's is still exporting a Western food product and experience. One of the other experiences I had of that time in China was that just outside the university gate was a small farming village with a church, a Christian church. And maybe 50% of the local people identified themselves as Christians. So my question is that small church in that farming village in rural China, is it a little bit like a branch of McDonald's, adapting itself a little bit to local tastes, but still a Western import? Or is it really as relevant to that community there as my church is to me and my wife in Bath? You see, Christianity is a worldwide brand. It's not a brand, but it's worldwide in every country you can imagine. And it's more successful than McDonald's. But is it still, at its heart, a Western export? You see, this question is vital because if any God is worth knowing, it is not the God of one particular people or country or culture. Surely is the God of the world. I'm not even going to suggest that Christianity is somehow the white person's religion. I think that would be insulting even to say it. It would be historically inaccurate in terms of its origins and certainly inaccurate in terms of today. But in a church meeting I was in Oxford a number of years ago, sorry, I said that word again, didn't I? Oxford. I was sitting next to a man, a visitor from West Africa. And as we chatted, he asked me what my job was. And at that time, I was doing a lot of kind of cross-cultural communication training, particularly within the Christian church. I was helping British people to be more sensitive and helpful in their explanation of Christianity to people from non-Western countries. And also myself, I was hoping to be able to communicate the Christianity in a cross-culturally sensitive way. And I'll never forget what his reply was. He looked rather unimpressed and said missionaries came to Africa from Europe and made no attempt to adapt to the local culture, but we Africans responded to God despite the missionaries' lack of cultural sensitivity. Actually, I was quite ashamed. Not just because he seemed to be implying that my job was a bit pointless, but I think what he was really saying was that the African people he was describing were responding not to Western culture or European culture or imperialism. What they were responding to was God himself in the person of Jesus Christ. And they were well able to distinguish between the two. And I think that's really important for us to recognize that. To suggest that people only convert to a religion because of cultural pressure or imperialism suggests that the people on the receiving who actually receive this message are actually somehow bowing to pressure or bowing to the dominant culture and not able to actually see that the message, if you take away all the rubbish about the messengers, was actually something they wanted for themselves. In China, Christian missionaries had about 100 years between approximately 1850 and 1950, where there was relative openness for missionaries to be in the country. But then in 1953, China expelled all foreign missionaries. At that time, the estimates were around 600,000 people who identified as Christians in the whole of China. And as many Western missionaries left the country, they thought that will be the end of the church in China. Quite the opposite happened. And today, estimates run anywhere between 50 and 100 million followers of Jesus. You see, once they were able to follow their faith without Western influence, without the kind of the links and the complications that come necessarily with overseas influence, they were free to be able to develop what it meant to follow Jesus Christ faithfully from the Bible in their own context. A friend of ours from Vietnam became a Christian in the UK before she went back to live in Ho Chi Minh City. But she made it very clear to us that she was not interested in Western culture. She wasn't particularly impressed by Western culture, but she did want to know God for herself. She wanted to know what it meant to be both Vietnamese and a Christian, and she often referred to herself as God's Vietnamese daughter, as if he only had one. Nevertheless, people still make assumptions. I was in a taxi in Singapore once, and the older man, the taxi driver, was complaining to me about young people in Singapore today. And he said, young people in Singapore today don't understand Chinese ways, and so they become Christians. Now, I didn't contradict him, but I thought it was very interesting that he simply assumed that somehow becoming a Christian was because they didn't understand Chinese culture. And I thought, well, it may be the case for some people, but certainly that is a generalization. So back to the piece of paper in front of you. As I say, this is a small part of the Bible. And Paul, this academic, a Jewish man, academic who had become a Christian, was invited to give a talk on the Christian faith. He is referring to Jesus, although Jesus is not mentioned in the passage. And the talk is to a group of philosophers and academics and teachers in the city of Athens, which is a little bit like a cross between New York and Cambridge. It's kind of center of learning. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing that you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man, that is Jesus, he appointed, and has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So the city of Athens was full of religious expression. So in Singapore, just around the corner from Lynette's parents' house, there is a big Buddhist complex around the corner. The other way is a Taoist temple. There are Hindu temples, there are mosques, there are churches, a very multi-religious society. And Athens was a multi-religious society. There were shrines and temples and statues everywhere. But Paul found a shrine or an altar that was blank. It had no figure on it. All it had was an inscription to an unknown God. I think the Athenians were recognizing something important, that they were missing something. And I just wonder whether you feel that. Maybe you have a religious background, maybe not, but maybe you're aware that there's just something missing. There's just something that doesn't quite add up. There's a hole in your universe. And Paul went on to explain that what they were missing was not just another God to add to the mix. He wasn't suggesting that Jesus is one more God amongst many. He was saying that the one that they were missing was the God over all, the creator of everything, who can be known through his son, Jesus. You may be surprised just how many cultures believe or have believed at some point in their past a supreme God or power or force. And if you go back far enough, there is a time when many peoples will trace to when their ancestors knew about some form of creator God who is good. The Santal people of India trace their ancestors back to a time when they lived in Central Asia, and their ancestors knew a god called Thakka, which is the one true God. But they believe that they had upset their relationship with him while they were traveling through the Himalayas to get to where they are today, because they sacrificed to the spirits of the mountains. And when they did that, they lost their relationship with God. And so they had a sense of loss, of longing in their culture, that their ancestors knew God, but they blew it. And so when Norwegian missionaries came and talked about Jesus, they're saying, are you trying to tell us that actually there's a way back to Thakka? And the missionaries had the sense to say yes, through his son, Jesus. And they said, our ancestors have been waiting for this news. And many of them turned to the Lord Jesus Christ. But many times people sense there's something, but we don't know what. It's a little bit like the game of whispers. I think in America, you call it the telephone game. Is that right? I'm looking at you thinking you're American. Are you American? Yes, okay. It'd be really embarrassing if you weren't, wouldn't it? Where you have a little message, you tend to play this in primary school. You have a message, you whisper to the person next to you, and they whisper it to the next person on around the circle, and eventually you have a bit of a laugh about how the message has changed. Well, in some ways, that is seriously what's happened, where there is a sense or a leftover, the echoes and whispers of a knowledge of God that's been lost. But in the blank space, we have filled that space with lots of ideas, but God is still a mystery. We were studying the Bible with a group of students from different countries in our home, and we were talking about the name God and how God is translated into different languages. And one girl from China said, well, often God is called 上帝 in Chinese. She said, 上 is like up or above, and Di is the word for emperor. The emperor above all. And then she continued to explain, and these are her words, not mine, that in ancient China, the emperor was a distant and mysterious figure. So Shangdi, the emperor above all, is even more distant and even more mysterious. I love that explanation, except that I recognized it. Because when we had worked in a Chinese church in Singapore, people would pray, Shangdi, 我们的天父, which is the emperor above all, who is our 天父, our heavenly Father. You see, as Christians, we experience the mysterious God behind everything, who has become our heavenly Father through a relationship which has begun through his Son, Jesus. I wonder if anyone has ever met Queen Elizabeth II. Anybody? One or two hands go up. Oh, okay. Hey. Anybody just seen her? Okay. Well, I've never met her, but I've seen her 3 times. Well, strictly speaking, I've seen her twice and seen a hat in a car once. All I saw was a hat in a car going past. I've read a lot about her, but I've never met her. I certainly didn't know her. But imagine I'm speaking to King Charles, and not that I do, and he and I are talking about his late mother, the Queen, and I say, oh, I know all about your mother. She was quite a shy lady, but she had a quite strong sense of duty, and she liked horses and dogs, and he might go, well, yes, those things are accurate to an extent, but that's not really who she is. That's just a little bit. That's just like a caricature of who she is. And if you compare what I say about the Queen and what King Charles says about her, what you get is, in some ways, we're talking about the same person, but we're actually, in some ways, not talking about the same person. Because the description that he gives is based on knowledge and relationship. And the description I'm giving is guesswork. As Christians, this is what we are saying, that the world has often had a sense of a force or a power, a God over the universe, but he's remained a mystery to most people. But Jesus has come not just simply to tell us about God or to give us another way of living or to give us another kind of moral code. What he's come to do is to show us, by his personality, who God is, what he is like. Jesus said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. But also, he has come to enable God to no longer be a stranger. Now, the way that happens is this. Most religions in the world teach that these are the good things you must do, and these are the bad things you must avoid. And if you do enough good to outweigh your bad, you are rewarded. And if you do more bad to outweigh your good, you are somehow punished. More or less, that's what most religion teaches to a greater or lesser extent. But the problem with that is that nobody tells you how good is good enough. Nobody tells you when you've done enough to kind of make it, or whether one bad deed equals one good deed, or how it works. You just have to kind of hope for the best, but the problem is, by the time you know, it's too late. But if you can understand that when the reason why God feels so far away is because we have the sense with which we must do something to get to God, but we have no idea what. But we know deep down that there is a distance, and that distance is created because of the things that we do, which itself create that distance. Like the Santal people I mentioned earlier, that they knew that their ancestors had done something to create that distance between us and God. Now imagine that distance is to do with a debt. We understand, don't we, debt in terms of relationships. I don't need to talk to students about debt, but I wonder if any of you, a silly question, anybody been in debt? Well, I was really in debt once when I was 9 years old, hopelessly in debt. I was playing with some friends in the woods near my home, and one of them had a kind of army truck toy, and I loved it. And he said, well, if you like it so much, I'll sell it to you for £5. So this is a very long time ago, and £5 was quite a lot of money. I said, I don't have £5. He said, it's okay, you can pay me back. So I thought, wow, I can get toys on credit. And it's so easy. It was just so easy. I did it twice more. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw something that my friend had, and I said, I'll buy that off you for £5. I'll pay you back. My wife thinks I was a very strange child. But basically, after 2 weeks, I suddenly realized I was in debt by £15. Now, I could get money by washing my dad's car, and he paid me 50 pence a time. And in my 9-year-old brain somewhere, I clearly was not going to study economics, was I? Somewhere, I realized I'd have to wash my dad's car 30 times to pay off this debt. And I felt stuck. I felt utterly trapped. And I had no idea what to do. Then Mum found out. I have no idea how, but I think mums have a special radar for the trouble their kids get into. And she said, oh, gosh, Peter, how much do you owe? And I said, £15, £5 to each of these 3 boys. And she said, right, get in the car. So I got in the car. And she drove me to each of these 3 boys' houses. And she made me stay in the car while she herself went and paid the £5 back in each case. I later discovered that £15 was the total of what she had for herself for a month. So when she had paid off the bills and the food and everything else like that, after my dad had kind of budgeted everything, she had £15 to spend on herself, and she spent it all on getting me out of trouble. Then she got back in the car and she said, Peter, doesn't it feel horrible to be in debt? And I said, yes, Mum, it does. She said, I have paid your debt. Now, don't do that again. And I felt free. I felt like a big weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And I knew that my mum then didn't want me to pay her back. What she was doing was she was setting me free, but she was looking for a change of behavior, and she got it. In a very small way, this is what we are saying this week. Is that God is a mystery to most people, and therefore unimaginable how on earth could we possibly know him. Maybe he's not there at all. But what Jesus has done through his death on a cross is to pay our debt. He has wiped our debt. So not so that we can just do what we like, but so we can have a change of behavior, start again, but this time know God as our Heavenly Father. Thank you very much for listening. So I look forward to your questions. I think we're going to eat now too, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for that talk. That was very nice. Dinner will now be served. On the menu today is rice, naan, chicken tikka masala, rajma with jalfrezi, and for dessert we have gulab jamun, so I hope you're looking forward to that. Just a few notes on dietary requirements. The veggie dish contains traces of sesame, the meat dish contains dairy, peanuts, and nuts, and the dessert contains cashews and dairy. If any of that is confusing or you're unsure, just let anyone in the human jumper know, and they'll hopefully fix you. Food will be placed in the middle of your table, so you can take as much or as little as possible, as much or as little as you like, and let any stewards know if you like any more food.
Yeah. And while you're being served, we have a Q&A. So basically, if you go to this QR code or you go to slido.com, #human dinner, don't worry, there's no human in this dinner, but weird title. Anyway, yeah, you can basically ask any question you like. We love skeptics, so be as poignant and as difficult as you want to be. And then Peter will answer your questions later. Yeah, thanks everyone. Hi everyone. We are just going to do the Q&A now. And I will get down from here pretty soon. But Peter's going to be asking you questions. We have some really good questions, which is amazing. First one, should we just start from the top one, Peter? Yeah. How can you say there's only one way to heaven when there are so many religions in the world?
we on? Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you for these questions. I think, first of all, Slido is a great resource, isn't it? Where you can ask questions and also vote for each other's. But even then, when you type in a question, you think, I hope this is going to be okay. And that question right at the beginning is a tough one. And what I don't want you to hear from me is a kind of glib, I'm right, everyone else is wrong, kind of wiping off the rest of the world as if that doesn't matter. You know, there are days when I almost wish that it was easier and I didn't have to say that there was one way to God for so many reasons. But I also recognize that, you know, you can debate on the positives and negatives of this religion versus that religion and whose religion is better than whose, and I'm not sure that's very productive. But when Jesus said this, he said this thing to his disciples. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. And one of the things about that, he's talking about the truth and the way and the life being a person, not a religion. He's talking about himself. But also he's being quite specific. He's not just saying, no one comes to God but by me, although clearly that's what he meant. He said, no one comes to the Father but by me. And if I take a kind of step back and think about what I know about different religions in the world, what I've experienced, the people I've met, I have to say the conclusion I've come to is that we can talk all day about what God might be like, who God might be like, but actually it is only through Jesus that in any way promised and any way experienced that we can know him on a personal level. And that is because he has made a way himself. You see, if Jesus died in order for that to happen, then that's not something you can just kind of go, well, it matters, but it doesn't matter that much. It's kind of an either or. But it comes down to this one thing, that do we know about God or do we know him?
Thank you so much for that answer. And as we carry on with the Q&A, do feel free to upvote questions which you like or add your own questions. That would be greatly appreciated. Moving on to the next question. Why do you think Christianity is struggling in the West but thriving elsewhere in the world? I'm
not entirely sure. Some may say, well, it's not. I mean, one of the things is that, so when I became a Christian, which is 35 years ago, there are a lot of people in Britain who would say they were Christians. And that number has changed. It's dramatically dropped. But I'm not sure that the number of active followers of Jesus has changed that much. Because there is a difference between somebody saying they're a Christian because it's their culture and somebody who is really a follower of Jesus. I remember when I first became a Christian, having been an atheist, and one of my older relatives said to me, well, that's good, but you're a Christian anyway. And I said, well, no, actually, I was an atheist. I thought he didn't know what the word atheist meant. And he said, yeah, but you were born in England. And I realized that we were talking about two different things. He was talking about a cultural identity, and I was talking about an active relationship with God. And they're quite different things. And so when you look at the West, I think that as a cultural identity, it is dropping massively. But I think that those who actually actively love Jesus and follow him, I'm not sure the number's shrinking. But I would say that, people may come back at me with better statistics than I have in my head. The rest of the world is actually showing that the church in the West is actually often quite compromised, quite weak. You know, in certain parts of the world, if you are baptized as a Christian, they ask you two questions. Are you willing to suffer for Christ? And are you willing to die for Christ? And they will only baptize you if you say yes to those two questions. And that means that often we in the West The greatest thing we have to fear is ridicule from our friends. And that often produces a weak church, whereas often in many other countries, many other places in the world, the church is very tough and very strong because they're willing to pay the price.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Peter. The last question that we have is, what was the name of the people you mentioned who traveled over the Himalayas?
Okay. It was the Santal people. That is just one example, and probably not the best. If you look at history of peoples in southwest China, Myanmar, northeast India, and some of these people we studied with at Bible College in Singapore from the Naga Hills, from Mizoram, a lot of them have a tradition or a series of oral stories that relate back to a time when their ancestors knew God, and they fit very, very closely with the Old Testament stories of creation and the fall. And so it's all over the world, but that area particularly is very strong.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. We don't want to let those discussions stop here. So we'd love you to continue to discuss these things around your tables. If there's any more questions that you want to maybe ask Peter in person, you can come and grab him and talk to him. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. Oh, do we have another question? Okay, we'll do the other question then. Okay, you mentioned that in Africa, people were responding to God, not to European culture. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I'm in no way particularly experienced in African cultures at all, but I did feel that example of that man was helping me to understand something which is true generally, is that we often think of, we take a very superficial look at history and go, oh, Christians did that, Christians did this, and we're looking at Europeans did this and Europeans did that. For example, in India, the East India Company did not want missionaries anywhere near. They banned missionaries from coming to India. So the people from Britain, which was the East India Company, they were interested in money. And they didn't want missionaries anywhere near. So it was not necessarily that imperialism and Christianity necessarily always mixed. But sometimes we have a superficial view of history and just treat everyone with the same label. But when it comes to what I mentioned about Africa, I think sometimes it's a very ethnocentric view, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is saying, well, because so-called Christian empires went to these places, they promoted Christianity, and therefore the local people had no choice. They just kind of acquiesced, and that was it. I'm not sure that's always the case. It tends to kind of just assume that the recipient cultures have no power of choice for themselves. And whilst there has been mixing, and there has been compromise, and there has been abuse, actually, in places like the African cultures that I mentioned, they have actually taken the reality of the gospel and run with it and have put the West to shame. There are more Christians, active Christians in Nigeria today than there are in the whole of the West of Western Europe. And that's just to choose one example.
Thank you so much for that answer, Peter. I think there's one more question. Are there aspects of Western Christianity that you think are particularly untrue to the original gospel message that maybe Christianity elsewhere does better?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I would say untrue, but I think we all look at Christianity with the spectacles that come with our culture. And the Christianity is both acultural and transcultural. Not quite sure those words are quite accurate. Anyway, what I mean is to say that Christianity is transferable to any culture. You do not have to come from a particular culture in order to follow Jesus. You can come from any culture. But it is not, we are still cultural beings. So what tends to happen when you are in a genuine relationship with God through Jesus, then two things happen. First of all, it fits with some aspects of our culture and augments some aspects of our culture, and it takes the positive and really, to give you an example, in the 5th commandment in the Bible is to honor your mother and father. Well, in England, that's not difficult. It's not difficult to honor your mother and father because parents have fairly low expectations of what that means. But actually, I've learned a lot from being in an Asian family where actually that's really important. But then there are other aspects which the gospel transforms and challenges the culture. And so, for example, in the West, what often we do is we tend to ignore what Jesus says about materialism. And actually, the materialism tends to take a stranglehold on the Christian vitality. So I'm not necessarily sure that Western Christianity is untrue, but I would say that we have our biases.
Cool. Well, I think that might conclude all the questions. So as Emma was saying before, we don't want the conversation to stop here. So feel free, if you have any questions, to grab Peter. I'm sure he'd love to talk about them with you. Or keep on chatting, eating food, whatnot. Yeah, this is the official end of today. Oh, are we missing? Oh, how could I forget? There is dessert. Gulab jamun will be served. Yeah, I think that might be happening now or in the near future. So stay tuned.
Yep. All of the dessert has nuts in it, by the way. So if you are allergic to nuts, we are so sorry. But if you're not, I hope you enjoy it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Thanks, everyone.